point.
Okay, we can do that. Thanks for reminding me, Mel. Let's see, is almost, no, everybody is not here yet. Oh, Christina, good morning.
Christina's here?
Hmm.
Where is she? Ooh. Oh,
No,
you're right here.
what I really wanted to do was on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, our beloved Rabbi Kaye is going to celebrate another significant birthday. At our age, every birthday is significant.
Steve Kaye is going to be whatever age he's going to be.
Yeah.
21.
So I would like to wish Rabbi Kaye an extremely happy birthday.
Me too.
Amen.
And I'd invite us all to sing happy birthday, but that really is a cacophony of immeasurable distaste. But anyway, happy birthday, Steve.
Thank you, Rabbi. I don't know if I should hold up my Medicare card or my vaccination card, you know.
Well, they're both equally important nowadays.
No, the real card, the real card I'll hold up is my Harley renewal card. It's really, you know, it's really hard to walk around with a card that says Hog, you know, when you try and keep some kind of kashrut.
Yeah.
Andrea, that's an article. How do Jewish motorcycles belong to the Hog Owners Group? That's what stands for Harley Owners Group.
Yeah.
Kosher. There you go. There's an article for you. Keeping kosher while on a hog. There it is. That's a great blog. Keeping kosher, being a Jew on a hog.
Yeah.
Oh, you write it.
I got a new one now. I got a new blog to write.
Well, that is the Harley. That's the
Harley.
That's the New York Stock Exchange symbol for Harley.
Yeah. No, that's different. There's a different group called the Harley Owners Group, and it's called Hog, and it's a subset of Harley. And I was working with a congregation in Minneapolis, and the president of the congregation said to me, what do you do for your birthday? This was several years ago. And I said, well, I bought a Harley. And she says, what kind? And I told her what kind. And she says, what year? And I told her what year. She said, oh, that came in red, blue, this, that. And I'm going, like, lady, how do you know this stuff? You know, like, you know, not. She says, don't you know what my husband does? I said, no. She says, he's the one who coordinates Hog nationally. It's his business, selling all the paraphernalia.
Oh.
2 days later on my doorstep are like 40 different Hog shirts and memorabilia and cups and stuff like that.
Good.
So the next time I went to Minneapolis, instead of doing the meeting at the temple, we went to his showroom that has all the Hog stuff. I said, how am I going to get any work done? How am I going to get work done? There are too many toys.
That's great.
Ray, do you still ride your Vespa?
You sold it.
I gave it to the temple about 8 years ago. Oh, not that long ago, about 5 years ago.
What did they do with it?
Didn't Matt take it?
They auctioned it off, and Matt Gordon bought it.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah, so he's been riding it ever since. But let's see, I still have.
Where'd you go?
I still have a tzedakah box.
I do too.
That is.
Oh, that's cute.
Yeah.
That's very cute.
A Vespa tzedakah box. But it has no opening, so I've decided maybe I'm not going to put anything in, because the only way to get it out would be to break it. And that just seems so silly to me. So.
Well, Rabbi, I don't know if you can see what this is.
It says Harley Davidson on it.
Yeah. But if you push the button,
yeah,
it turns red.
It makes sound like, you know, a beeper, you know.
Oh, yeah.
It makes the sound of a motorcycle. So when I'm running a meeting, this is what I use to stop all the background noise. People know I'm serious. It's the timer.
Oh. So make a sound.
I need batteries. And I don't use electricity on Shabbos, so I can't use.
Yeah. That's why we're on Zoom, right? We're not using electricity, right?
All right, there we go.
Listen, I want to give another shout out to David for helping us with our vaccines. We got our second one this week, our second shots, and so I'm feeling much better. I have a feeling that card that you get with a record of your vaccines, that card's probably going to be your entrance card to half a dozen different things during the course of the next year. In
They
order
probably
to
will. I got my
you're safe.
second shot.
I think you're right. I do.
Yes and no. They're going to make it. They're going to do an electronic version of it. Once
Maybe a
Yeah,
senior
I would
rating
think,
card.
they're creating verifications of this,
yeah.
and United Airlines has already started it.
Wow.
You know,
Well,
there's an article.
Israel gives people a special green card that says, that says vaccinated on it, and that they have to start showing that everywhere.
I'm sorry, that was me. And I didn't do it.
In the
on purpose.
meantime, the people who gave me my shot suggested that I take a picture of the card, both sides of the card, and keep it on my phone because people will start to ask for that identification until we get the permanent ones that they're planning.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, I
It'll be
did.
for the seniors dating organization. You'll need one.
Rabbi, when did you get a second shot?
Thursday.
Oh, okay. You
Yeah.
feeling okay?
Oh yeah, I'm feeling fine. Ricky was a lot under the weather yesterday, but she woke up smiling and happy, and so she's fine today.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so we're both fine. You get the usual sore arm for a day or so.
I think about 20% of the people get significant side effects, and it was unrelated to age or antiviral vaccine in our family. My youngest got really, really sick. Got up in the middle of the night. He had soaked through his sheets. He took them off and put them in the tubs, and so he could get some sleep on dry sheets. Lori gets very sick with both of them. The shingle shot she got really sick with, and her second COVID shot she got sick with.
Wow. Wow.
My grandson, Adam, got very sick with the second shot.
Yeah, that's
And
about 30 hours.
he's 22 years old. And he got really sick, and he called me and he asked me if I got sick, and I didn't. I was fine.
Well,
My
they-
neurologist went to the emergency room. She got so sick.
I figured it was good that I was sick. And that
Why
it
are
was
so many young
okay.
people getting the shots when the older people still don't have them?
I have them.
They're medical
You're
workers.
not young.
They're doctors.
Oh, okay.
First line defenders.
Okay, that's different. Okay. I just found out this morning, I was talking to CVS, that they just received a notification that those hours, that the 30-day or 28-day,
Yeah.
they're being expanded out now because they're finding that it's not that much of a problem. They still want to do it soon, but they're not limiting it to the 28 or 30 days to get the second shot.
Now they say they don't need such strict refrigeration rules.
Yeah,
Every-
Pfizer.
It's different.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm going to send around a story about Albert Bourla, who is the CEO of Pfizer. He was on TV with President Biden yesterday, who took a tour of the Pfizer plant with Governor Whitmer and a couple of other people from Michigan, a couple of other representatives. And that's a very interesting story about Bourla, a Holocaust survivor, who comes to the United States and becomes a top-notch scientist and becomes CEO of Pfizer and actually helps develop the vaccine. So
He didn't look Sephardic. He was supposedly from Turkey.
yeah, he's from Turkey, Sephardic, and he lived in Israel, and that's how Bibi got the first big tranche of vaccines, because he made sure that Israel was got that first big tranche. So, yeah, interesting story. I'll send it around today. After. Oh, gee, it's time. So I think we left off. I want to finish the.
You raise my hand?
I want to finish the priests.
What do I want to say? You want to say
and-
something?
and get into the prophets afterwards. But if we can finish the section on the priest, that would be good, and then answer Mel's question. So we are on chapter 18 of Deuteronomy, verse 5, I believe, and if not 5, so we'll figure out what it is. Yeah, it's 5. So verse 5 basically says that Kivo v'har Adonai Elohecha mikol shivtecha la'amod l'sharet b'shem Adonai hu uvanav kol hayamim. So God has chosen him, namely the priest, the Levite actually, and his descendants out of all the tribes to serve the Lord your God for all time. So this essentially gives rise to the idea that the priesthood is eternal and that it should never disappear. And verse 6 sort of continues the thought. It says, "V'chi avo halevi me'echad sha'arecha." If a Levite wants to go from one place within his gates, Mikol Yisrael, anywhere in Israel, Asher Hugar, anywhere that he lives, Sham, there, Uva B'chol Avat Nafsho, and he decides to go anywhere else that his soul desires. B'chol Avat Nafsho is a sort of an interesting Hebrew expression. Wherever his soul wishes. Elam Akom Asher Yivchar Adonai, including the place where God will cause his name to dwell. So if a Levite wants to, he can go from any place that he's living in to any other place in Israel, including Jerusalem. So he can go anywhere he wants. And since the priesthood is for all time, therefore, two things happen. Fundamentalist Orthodox Jews say that if the priesthood is eternal, then there has to be another temple, because otherwise the priests have no function, and they should have a function. And so should the Kohen Gadol, the great high priest. And others come around and say, we perpetuate the Levite and the high priest in name eternally without a function. So everyone whose name is Cohen, or everyone whose name is Levi, or everyone whose name is Cates or Katz, is automatically considered to be a high priest and could function as such if he knows all of the laws. Katz, K-A-T-Z, or even the guy who cleaned my carpet this week, or got the water out of the carpet, was a young man named Jerry Cates, who I bar mitzvahed in 1968. And he said, when they said it was your carpet, Rabbi, I thought, gee whiz, I haven't seen you in 50 years. And I said, what's holding you up, Jerry? You could have been there all these 50 years. I thought you moved out of town. He said, no, I just moved out of the temple area. Oh, okay.
Rabbi, before you go on, because Yoni asked me to put it up on the screen, give me the exact chapter and verse we're at so I can put it up on the screen.
18:6.
18:6. Okay, thanks.
So we have the names that have continued throughout history, or certainly since last names have come into existence, say from about the time of the Napoleonic era in France. Napoleon insisted that all Jews have last names, which is why so many Jewish last names seem French or German. But we also have continued the tradition of Levites and Kohanes Talmudically, because since the function of the priest has now been, animal sacrifice has now been eliminated from his function, so the Kohen and the Levite have been elevated in the synagogue, which is, kind of strange to think about, but they have been. A Kohen, or someone who traces his ancestry back to the priesthood, is called first to the Torah, and a Levite is called second, and everyone else is called third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, wherever they happen to fall for aliyahs to the Torah. And that is held true throughout the Middle Ages and even into today. So we still maintain the idea that a Kohen and a Levi are the first to be honored in the temple, in the synagogue, even though just as they were first to be honored in the temple in Jerusalem, so they're the first to be honored in the institution that replaced the temple in the synagogue. Any questions?
I just had a comment that today, if your last name is Cohen, we have a lot of restrictions in Israel. For example, you cannot marry a divorced woman.
Right.
And that's have been a huge problems, because
Right.
of a lot of problems.
Right. Yeah. There is a downside to all of this when you're dealing with a fundamentalist regime that controls the religious aspects of a country. And
How often do people change their names so they can do things?
not so easy in Israel. Because, everything's computerized and they know what your other name was. And your whole history comes up. Unless you're a member of Shin Bet or Mossad or something, basically your identity is pretty well known. And getting married in Israel is problematic enough, but when you have to deal with Kohen and divorce and all that, and the mishigas of you can't get married altogether unless you've got a get from a previous marriage. and unless the get has been given out by someone who is recognized by the chief rabbinate, you can't get married. So what people do is they hop on a plane, go to Cyprus, get married, come back. There really has to come a day fairly soon when there will be civil marriages in Israel. And I'm not convinced it's going to happen in my lifetime, but I'm sure that by the 50s, it'll another 20 or 30 years. By the time Israel celebrates its 100th anniversary, they'll have civil marriages. And if they do, you can credit me for it, saying that. And if they don't, so who cares? So we've continued that tradition with Levites and Kohanim. There is a problem, however, with the priest going wherever he wants to go. He can go to any other community, but if he goes to another community and he wants to offer a sacrifice, it seems that there must have been some sort of a system whereby he had to wait in line for all of the other priests of that particular area to finish their duty before he could offer his sacrifices. And the reason for that was that when a priest offered a sacrifice, he was entitled to 3 parts of the animal. And the other priests didn't really want to, let a stranger come in and immediately take away their parnasa, their due, so to speak. And so the priest could go wherever he wanted, but he kind of had to wait in line in order to be able to offer the sacrifice until he became part of that community. Now, when we get to verse 7 and 8, we're gonna see that there's a system of perquisites for the Levites, and a Levite could practice anywhere but in the temple in Jerusalem. A Levite from the north or from the south could not just go to Jerusalem, walk into the Temple Mount and say, I'm a Levite, let me offer a sacrifice. That didn't go. You had to be a part of the Levitical group that was specifically involved with sacrifices in the temple itself. However, the Levites were also musicians. If a Levite was a musician and not a ritual slaughterer and not somebody who took part in the sacrifice, but took part in the service of the sacrifice, then you could be a musician and you could play your instrument in the Levitical choir. Or if you were a singer, you could sing, but you couldn't participate in offering the sacrifice. And I can understand that they certainly didn't want people to walk in and say, hey, I'm a Levite, let me offer this next sacrifice. I'm sure that had something to do with it. But if a guy says, I'm a musician, let me play the harp, 3 notes later, you knew if he was a musician or not. Okay, so let's go on to verse 7 and 8, and we will have finished the priestly entitlements. Verse 7, V'sharet b'shem Adonai Elohav k'chol echav haleviim ha'omdim sham lifnei Adonai, that he may serve in the name of God, like all his fellow Levites who are there in attendance before them. So he can go and he can serve in any other settlement, in any other part of the country, but not at the temple. Chelik kechelik yochelu. And this is the reason why. Levad mimecharav al ha'avot. If this isn't tortuous Hebrew, I don't know what is. So chelik means a portion. Helik kechelik, a portion of a portion. Or I think here it means your due portion, the portion that you're entitled to. Yochelu, they may eat. Except for levad, mimcharav, that which he sold, al ha'avot, according to his fathers. Well, the translation is probably a whole lot better than what I just said, because I would have never thought of the word patrimony. So wherever this priest, this Levite goes, wherever he decides to, he lives in one part of this country, but wherever he decides to go, he can go there and he can, when he offers up a sacrifice, he can get that part of the sacrifice which he is entitled to, and he may take it and share it with his family and he may eat it, except that portion which he was entitled to where he lived, which was part of his patrimony that he may have sold in order to get enough money to go travel throughout the country. I think that's the meaning of it. I mean, I looked up Rashi, and Rashi doesn't know what he's talking about, and Ibn Ezra doesn't know what he's talking about, and Sephorno doesn't have an idea about what it's all about. So I figured if the commentaries aren't really clear, then I can be somewhat obscure too on this verse, because I have no idea what it's talking about. So I assume that I assume that a priest is allowed to sell his portion. Here's what Rashi says. This teaches that the priests who come to Jerusalem on the festivals as pilgrims, but are not in charge, participate in the hides of the burnt offerings due on the festivals. Oh, from whence did he get that? I have no idea. And he can eat of the flesh of the he-goats brought as sin offerings on account of the festivals. One might think that they participate also in the sacrifices which are offered not on account of the festivals, as for instance, the continual burnt offerings, the additional offerings due on account of the Sabbath on which a festival happens to fall, and vow and free will offerings. Scripture, however, states they shall enjoy like portions except for the sale of the fathers, except for those things which their ancestors sold to each other in the days of David and Samuel, when the system of shifts was established, and they made, as it were, an agreement of sale, saying, take the ordinary priestly perquisites during your week, and I shall take them during my week. Well, that makes it all very clear. And so we leave Rashi sitting on his commentary and wondering what the heck he just said. I have no idea where Rashi comes up with some of this stuff. I don't think it's Talmudic, but you know, he's 1,000 years closer to the temple sacrifice than we are. So maybe he knows something that we don't know. But I don't understand where he comes with the idea that a priest is entitled to the hide of a sheep or of an ox, even though he doesn't offer the sacrifice. I don't know where he got that. In any event, there is really no commentary to verse to verse 7, and it's difficult to it's really difficult to know what in the world these Torah is trying to say about the Levites and their sacrificial offerings. This is very difficult to know what it's all about. So if there's anybody who has an explanation, I'm more than happy to entertain it. And if anybody knows what those two verses are all about, that would be wonderful. I think what it says is that a Levite, even though he is settled in one of the 48 Levitical areas, the 2,000 square cubit areas that Levites could settle. It's sort of like, Chabad. You're sent to one of these places to live and to do your ministering. So the Levites just go and they're sent to this 2,000 square cubit area, and that's where you're supposed to minister to all the people around you. Yeah, and I think this verse is just saying, hey, if you get tired of being there and you want to go somewhere else, so go somewhere else. But you can't just wander in and expect to get the same kind of a deal that you got in your own place. You have to wait your turn in order to be able to participate in the sacrifices and to get your entitlements for the sacrifice that you offer.
Rabbi, in Samuel, the different towns were trying to find Levites to do sacrifices for them.
Yeah.
And wasn't Samuel going around trying to supply Levites with people because towns didn't have them?
He was.
So wouldn't this sort of apply?
Well, you would think, but Samuel himself was a priest. That is, Samuel would have been a Levite himself, and he could offer the sacrifice.
But he was traveling all over the place, and there were a lot of towns that needed Levites.
That's a very good point. That's a great point, Amy. That is a great point. Yeah, I think I'll have to reread the first couple of chapters of Samuel 1. But I do think that is a terrific point, because somehow, he was taking Saul to different places within the same area. There's like a they weren't really town area around Shiloh. And he was announcing to all the people in those places that Saul was the king. So Saul was really only accepted as king in the northern kingdom. And I suspect that that's why David was able to get some sort of ascension, because he was from the southern kingdom. And it's very possible that Saul never really made headway into the southern part of Israel. And David, who was born in Hebron, was sort of, the champion of the South. And so maybe even the story of David and Saul is a metaphor for the conflict that existed between the North and the South, where the North had more people and had more wealth than the South in earlier biblical days. And then the South gained strength when David took over.
But the only reason that David was with Saul is because he played the harp
Right.
better than anyone else. And Saul was mentally ill and he needed the music to calm him down. And
Right.
David was the only one who can calm him down because David was such a good musician.
Right. Correct. Correct. Absolutely. Let's see, where are we? Okay. So Mel asked the question last week and the week before, actually, about can one be a Jew if you don't believe in a, what kind of a God did you say, Mel? In a
Repeat. Yeah. Well. Yeah. Can you be a meaningful Jew and not believe in a supernatural God?
Okay, so that begs, supernatural is the word. So that begs the question, what do you mean by supernatural?
Well, the supernatural, it's something where there are contradictory things done by a God. The story about the events of the creation of things don't ordinarily, it doesn't always fall into place. The concept that a God is almighty and all-knowing, but there are
Well, hang on one second. Let me ask you a question.
sure.
Focus this. So supernatural means above nature, outside
Yes.
of nature.
Yes.
And all knowing, all powerful, all this, all that. The question is, does God operate in history?
Does God operate in what?
History. Does God operate in history?
I don't know what that means. Does
God interfere with human life?
Yeah. 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 Oh, okay. I will buy that question.
Okay. So if you live in Amsterdam in the 1600s and you don't believe that God interferes or is active in human life, you can be a Jew, but you'll be ostracized, as Maimonides, as Spinoza was. You'll be placed in harem. No one will talk to you because Spinoza believed in a supernatural God, but he didn't believe that God operated in history. He believed that God was history. He believed that God was in everything. In fact, Spinoza believed that everything was in God and God was in everything. And therefore, when the rabbi said, explain your metaphysics, he explained this brilliantly. And they said, can you pray to the Rabbana Shalom? Can you pray to the master of the universe? And he said, no more than I can pray to the cells in my body. And they immediately sat Shiva for him and kicked him out of the community. Whence he changed his name from Baruch to Benedict, and and converted to Catholicism, not because he believed in it, but because he needed to have a community who would talk to him. So that was, because the Jewish community stopped talking to him. They'd pass him on the street as if he were dead. So, here's a Spinoza who believes in a supernatural God, but not necessarily a God who was apart from history or apart from humanity, but was defined by humanity. That God was in everything and everyone. It's sort of almost an Eastern thought, almost a Hindu thought imposed on Judaism.
Let me ask you a question
Yeah.
to go along with this. If you believe as Spinoza believed, then when you pray, there's no point in praying for your daughter to get into Princeton or for some historical thing to happen.
Exactly.
Right?
Well,
right?
where were you when I gave two high holiday sermons on who can pray and what is prayer? Where were you? And it was only 20 years ago. And how could you possibly forget by now?
Well, I have your book. Is it in your book?
It's absolutely.
Well, I can go back and read it then.
That would be you'll be tested next week.
Okay. But I'm trying to clarify this for myself, even. I think you can't really pray for anything that would be in history, anything substantive. If, as I say, something, cure my sister from cancer. You can't say those things. They don't mean anything. God doesn't do that. So if God is supernatural and God is not in history, what does God do?
Well, if you want to ask the founders of the United States, if you want to ask the forefathers of our Constitution and of our Bill of Rights and of the essential documents which form the basis of this country, all of our founding fathers were deists.
Right, I know.
And deism is essentially a belief that God created the world and then backed away. In other words, here's a world, whatever happens, my hands are off. I'm just creating the world and it's your problem. And so things evolve and animals come and weather comes and storms and volcanoes and hurricanes. And this is the nature of nature. And next thing you know, you got people and you got these huge chunks of land, and you guys want to have this political system, go have it. And you want to have that. But here's a political system that you could learn to live by. And, as I said last week, the word God only appears never in the Constitution, but only in the Declaration of Independence.
That's right.
And in the Pledge of Allegiance since the days of Eisenhower. But it didn't appear in the Pledge of Allegiance before Ike. When I grew up, it was one nation indivisible.
Right, me too.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty much like the Amida. Avot, Avraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, and then Imahot. Who knew from Imahot?
Rabbi?
Yeah.
According to that book that we read, and I recommend that book to everybody, it's called Faiths of the Founding Fathers.
Right.
About half of the founding fathers were deists. The other half were religionists. Adams, who was a big mover and shaker in causing the revolution, was somebody who was a religionist. Moreover, when Jefferson submitted the Declaration of Independence to the drafting committee, the drafting committee was the one that put in the language, we are endowed by our creator.
Mm-hmm.
So about half of them did believe in religion and God.
Well, I don't believe any of them thought that God acts in history. I think that they, endowed by our creator is like, okay, our creator, but there was no I don't know what would you say?
God gave us the tools to build our world. He did not build our world. He gave us tools. Okay. And then we got to use those tools however we saw fit or not. And we didn't agree always. And so we had wars and we had hurricanes and we had Texas. I mean,
I think the founding fathers thought of God as a hovering spirit that could be that voiced or didn't voice, but that nodded in a spiritual way approval to that which was good and sort of shook the divine head, so to speak, over that which was bad. In other words, I think that, when it says endowed by our creator, given the opportunity by a higher spirit, was I think what they were really trying to say. I don't think they saw God as a thing that interfered in history. I think they saw God as a guiding, as a light, as a beacon, aimed at a better future, at a better direction. Here's the light. Go toward it. If you turn and go the other way, then you're going toward the dark. If you keep progressing in this direction, you're always going toward the light. I think there was some sort of a thought along those lines. I don't think they saw God as a puppeteer. I don't think they, I think
they were Christian.
Rabbi?
Well, I'm not so sure they were such Christians either.
Rabbi?
No, they were Christian in name, but they weren't fundamentalist Christians. I don't think they were afraid of heaven and hell. In fact, I don't think there's any mention in anything that Washington wrote or that Jefferson wrote that talks about heaven or hell or divine punishment or salvation or in religious terms.
Rabbi, Darwin, when Darwin had written his stuff, and I don't know where Darwin was historically in relationship to the Declaration, but the problem he had and the harassment he got is at that time, they didn't see life changing. They didn't see any evolution. And so Darwin saying that things evolved was anti-God, anti-religious, because he felt things could evolve. So your premise about history would support what Darwin was facing, because people were hostile to him because he insisted that things could change.
Yeah. And, if things could change, then God didn't create them. And that would have been a no-no, because supposedly God created everything and rested. Right?
The other thing on that is Jefferson, when he sent Lewis and Clark out on their expedition, one of the things they were required to do was to bring back dinosaurs.
Right.
Anita?
Yeah.
Isn't it true when you sing the Mishnah Barak? Well, good morning. That we're praying for your loved one to to get rid of the cancer.
I don't think that the Mishnah Barak is specific like that, though. I think it's a more general thing.
Well, we're praying for the healing.
You're praying for healing, but do you mention? I mean, you can. I know in certain synagogues you mention the names of people that you want to particularly get noticed. But I don't see it as a get rid of the cancer thing. I think it's more general than that.
How does this answer Mel's question?
Well, there are two things that I can mention. One is there's a doctor by the name of Dosey, D-O-S-E-Y, who wrote a treatise, a book actually, on the healing power of prayer. And he said that prayer is non-local. That is, you don't have to be in the presence of the person for whom you are praying to affect a sense of the power of one's prayer. So he used a Talmudic concept. I don't think he was Jewish. He used the Talmudic concept that a person who prays for the health of another relieves the person of 1/60th of their pain and 1/60th of their illness. And he did these long-running studies of people who actually were given the name of someone who was sick, and they formed prayer groups wherever they happened to live. And at certain times of the day or the week or whatever, they would concentrate and focus on the illness of a person and praying for his or her wellness. And then he would do studies on whether this person felt better that day or some of the illness was taken away or what have you. And, you know, his study showed that prayer, local or non-local, was effective, whatever that means. There's another a story by Steve Allen. Yes, that's Steve Allen, the comedian, who wrote a book of short stories that were absolutely phenomenal. And this story was called "The Public Hating." One of the most powerful stories I've ever read. A mass murderer was finally caught, and he was sentenced to death. And he was led into an arena, a public arena, like a boxing arena. And he was put on a stool in the center of the arena, and his crimes were read to the full house that had assembled. And elements of his trial were read to the full house that was assembled. And the decision of the jury was read, and the verdict of the judge was read, and the pronouncement of a death sentence, fully warranted, was produced. And with that, the announcer stopped speaking. There was absolute quiet, and everyone in this 20,000 seat arena began to focus their hatred on him, and he withered and died. It was, I mean, the way it was written was just brilliant. So do the emotions of other people affect the well-being or the ill-being of other people? In other words, can you hate someone to death? Can you cure someone with your thoughts and with your prayers? Or call them what you will, thoughts, hopes, wishes, prayer
I
always
think-
seems to involve deity.
I know a story that happened here in Denver of a person who was involved in one of the Eastern religious kinds of prayer. And she prayed for the well-being of someone who lived on the East Coast who was sick. She had a melanoma, as a matter of fact, something that you could see. And the person got better.
There you go.
And that was a physical thing. You could see it and it went away. So why did it go away? Do you think that the person from Denver who prayed for the wellness of the person in New Jersey, I don't care where they were, but on the East Coast, that made a difference?
Dr. Lawrence Dossi would say probably yes. But who knows what that person's body was all about? And,
right.
And very possibly it was the body that was fighting the illness. Israel just developed a vaccine that's supposed to have a terrific effect against multiple.
And as you know, several books were written on laughter and how that could
yes
help. If it was for laughter, I would be dead. I believe. Excuse me. Go ahead.
No. You go ahead, Al.
I was going to say, and now I have a senior moment, so you could continue. You could continue.
Oh, when Liz Hoskins was struggling with ovarian cancer, every time she heard in synagogue people saying the Mishaberach, the tears would just pour out of her face. She did not believe in God. She felt that the community, just by thinking of her, might open the door to a healing. And she also knew that it would not. You know, I think we should pray. And I think whether we believe in God or not, we should pray for a healing of another human being, knowing that our prayers and that person's prayers may be lifted, but you're not going to get the outcome that you think you might get.
Well, Andrea, you have to buy a lottery ticket to win the lottery. So if you're praying, it can't hurt.
Right.
Rabbi?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No.
Rabbi, you were in the process of answering Mr. Coffey's question about can a Jew lead a meaningful life without believing in a supernatural God? And you were talking about Spinoza. Where do we go from Spinoza to current day Reform Judaism thinking?
Well, the deal is Judaism solely a faith? Because if Judaism is like Christianity, it is simple. You either have faith or you don't. But if Judaism and being Jewish involves more than a belief system, then you have a cultural, social, national, historical, cultural, gastronomic association, lingual association with Judaism that transcends faith. So there are many entrances into Judaism, and faith is not necessarily the only or even the best entrance. I get very nervous when people say I don't believe in God and therefore I don't go to synagogue. So what's the difference whether you believe in God? What's the old joke about the two Jews that are arguing whether there is a God or there isn't a God. And finally, Goldberg wins, and he says, "You see, I've proved there is no God." And Ginsburg says, "Well, what are you going to do on Saturday morning?" He says, "I'm going to go to shul." He says, But God isn't there. You just proved it." He says, "I know, but Ginsburg is there, and I like Ginsburg, so I'm going because of him." So, that's really the issue. The issue is what is it that we are Jews for? We're Jews to create a better us, and we're Jews to live by a certain value structure, regardless of whether it's divine or it's human. We're Jews for cultural and social and communal purposes. We're Jews because we reach out to help each other, and because we reach out to help others, regardless of what their religion is or their belief system. And that's what distinguishes us from other peoples.
But Rabbi, that's what you so clearly stated, why it's so difficult to explain to a non-Jew what a Jew is.
Okay.
I mean, a Catholic explaining to a Catholic, well, what do you believe? Well, what I believe isn't necessarily what every Jew believes. Well, what is the Jewish doctrine? Well, we don't really have one, except that there's one God, etc.
Yeah.
But having lived all over the United States, that's always been
difficult
an issue.
Because
Rabbi, who wrote the public hatred?
you get freedom of thought. You get, the old story: 2 Jews, 3 opinions. So you're going to encourage diversity, and there's a wide spectrum of diversity within the Jewish people, from atheists to fundamentalists. And unfortunately, the closer and closer you get to extremism, the less tolerant you become of those who are less extreme than you, and that always becomes problematic for Jews.
I wanted to comment.
You're not Jewish because you don't do X, Y, and Z. Well, that's nonsense. I don't do X, Y, and Z because it's not meaningful to me, and I don't believe that God needs me to do X, Y, and Z. But I will do A, M, and L because those are really meaningful things to me. And so while you go and daven in shul, I'm going to go out and distribute water to people who are dying of thirst. And I'm doing it as a Jew. And, you go do your thing, I'll go do my thing, and we'll meet somewhere after we do our things.
What role does the supernatural part play then? Maybe there isn't a supernatural part. Maybe it's my mistake.
I think that the supernatural aspect of it enables Jewish mysticism to exist and to flourish. I think people are intrigued by the idea of trying. Look, from the 9th century all the way through the 17th century, Jewish mysticism was a flourishing thing. And there were 2 aspects of Jewish mysticism: those who wanted to know God and those who wanted to find God. You had people writing hundreds and hundreds of tomes on how to do both. It became a flourishing intellectual experience for thousands and thousands and thousands of Jews. certainly through the 1700s, through the 17th century, and even
Rabbi,
into the 18th. Yeah.
Rabbi, the word supernatural is an absurd word in itself, because if you look at people in history, things that we consider normal today, they would have called supernatural. Things that will be in the future that people talk about, they say is supernatural, might not be supernatural. And so I think that word itself is very difficult to define. It's because throughout history, everything could be supernatural.
Right. Well, and certainly if you could have taken a working cell phone into any period of time before the 21st century, you would, or before the end of the 20th century, people would have stared at you like you were nuts. Like, what's going on here? That's who's doing that? And then you could have said, well, God is doing this. I'm talking to God. And you could have been the next Messiah.
Well, supernatural to me just means the next question that we haven't answered yet is supernatural.
I guess this is a fascinating discussion, but I guess, and I'm learning quite a bit, but I would like to define it rather than concentrating on the word supernatural. Can people concentrate on one word, God? Exactly. What is God? How do you find, like you said, how do you find God? If an individual believes in the values of the Jewish religion, charity and doing unto others and respect for parents and of everything else that makes us worthwhile humans. Must that individual also believe in, quote, God, end quote? I find myself very strongly tied in with what I think are Jewish values. But there are times that I question exactly what is God, who is God, why is God, and I have lots of questions. Now maybe that's getting into the discussion of what was being talked before about the deist and the non-deists. But I have a heck of a time defining in my mind what is a God, and can I subscribe to what I think are Jewish values if I have questions about what and who is God?
Well, first of all, the word is English, and it doesn't really relate to anything Jewish. God is an English title for and a generic English title, because God in Jewish history has 70 names, or at least 50, and I think there are 70 that you could come up with, and each of those names reflects what the people believed God's function was at a particular time in history. So God evolves, and and God has different aspects. Sort of an idea that if there is a divinity, then that divinity is multifaceted within a unity, or within a singularity, whatever the common term is. You know, when you refer to God as master of the universe, Rabbono Shel Olam, that was the God of the Hasidim, of the early Hasidim. But the later Hasidim knew God by a different name. You know, the earlier Jews in the Middle Ages, when they lived under monarchies, knew God as Melech HaOlam, as King of the universe. So essentially, you know, God's functions or aspects that we related to have changed over time, depending on the circumstances of the people, the place that we lived, the conditions under which we lived, and the like. I am sure that the God that was prayed to in Auschwitz was different from the God that was prayed to in Berlin in the 1910s. It just was. And I'm sure that the God that we prayed to in America in the 1950s and 60s is different from whatever we conceive of God in the 2020s, 2021s. When I think of the Reform movement in the 1950s, it was a simplistic time. What did we sing every Friday night? God is in his holy temple, earthly thoughts be silenced now. You could have divine thoughts. I never understood that even in the 50s, but we sang that song every Friday night in certain temples. You couldn't find a synagogue in the world that would sing that song today. Other songs were all the world shall come to serve you. Da 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 da. And we had more of a universalistic, naive kind of concept that since we have brought peace to the world through American might, we are now slowly but surely bringing peace to everywhere, and Jewish values will be at the forefront once again, and everybody will be happy and well, and the United Nations will operate smoothly, and so on and so forth.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
The one thing that I think unites all Jews, from the most religious, the most God-fearing people, to the least religious and least God-fearing people, is anti-Semitism. All hated equally.
Yeah. Yeah, where would we be without anti-Semitism?
Yeah, I was going to add, going back a little bit, some Reformed Jews go Friday night, some go Saturday morning, some go both, and some eat shrimp, some don't. So whatever makes some people want to do mitzvahs all the time. If they feel that's what they want to do, who's to question them?
You can question it, and you can say, hey, you know what? You could give up the shrimp and say, hey, I'm doing one thing at least. But to essentially, people make their own decisions as to how they want to live, but it's how they identify that's really at the core. And if you identify, then do something positive to build on that identity, whatever it happens to be. You know, if you want to do it gastronomically, then keep kosher or keep a semblance of kosher. If you want to do it culturally, then come to understand Jewish history or philosophy or music or the arts or some cultural aspect of a Jewish history. If you want to do it socially or through values, then live those values. And if you want to just stand up for the right of Jews to survive as a people, then make a stance and make a statement. When you hear somebody say something that doesn't smell right, say something about it, and say it loud and clear. I'm not going to put up with that kind of language, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
Rabbi, when I first interviewed you in '97, you said, and you repeated it on the way up Sinai, that God doesn't care whether we believe in him, that God believes in us.
Yeah, there you go.
No. Elucidate upon that.
Yeah. I said that all the time in the 1990s.
Oh, okay. Was it just something you said?
No, I mean, really, what difference does it make whether you believe in God or you don't believe in God? What difference does it make what you believe? You know, and what difference does it make if you lust in your heart or if you hate in your heart? Does that matter? The you is what you do. It's your acts. It's how you treat each other. It's not what you think of each other. It's how you treat each other. And because if we are judged by our thoughts, for God's sake, there are 100 billion synapses going through our mind every minute of the day. And if you're gonna be judged by what those synapses are doing to us, and you're not overcoming the bad and working toward the good, then that's kind of ridiculous. So what does it matter what you think, so long as how you act defines the best that you can be? So,
Rabbi, can I share a couple of things?
Please.
I don't know if this is helpful. I will say, from my own experience, there have been moments when it did matter. And I think this speaks to kind of the Spinoza example, and Mel, maybe to your question as well, of, you know, can you still find meaning if you don't believe in a certain type of God or in God? And I would say personally, right, like, yes, I think a person can find meaning. From my experience, I can find meaning in Judaism without believing in a God. But from a communal aspect, I had, when I was in, I was in an Orthodox community for a little bit. I had a friend, we talked a little, he understood what I did and did not believe in. A couple of weeks later, I'm at Shabbat services, and they're looking for a service leader. You know how the Orthodox communities do. They don't give you any prep time. They just kind of like tap you on the shoulder and say, all right, get on stage, you're doing it. And he protested. And I had a whole thing, the whole community, I had to leave, right? It was a whole thing. It was, Yoni cannot lead services for our community. He doesn't believe in God. You're not allowed to lead services if you don't believe in God, right? It was great. I actually enjoyed it. It's like the kind of attention that I'm not uncomfortable with.
Yeah.
But sometimes there are, right? Like there are sometimes moments when people make it important what you do and do not believe. And it can be difficult to live in the world alone, right? And I don't mean alone as in separate from God. I mean alone separate from people, right? Yeah. And that can be very hard. On the other side, right? At my brother's wedding, my dad asked me to lead services on Friday night. And so I asked him, I said, Abba, are you sure that you want me to lead services? I don't believe in God. And he said, you have a nice voice. You know Hebrew. Get up there, right? And so I think that shows also the strength in that human relationship. One of the things that I like about myself as a non-God believer is I teach theology all the time, right? I've written curriculums on Jewish theology, and the shift that I've started to see just in the way that I've interacted with the people around me is that I went from people not telling me that they believed in God because they thought that I would attack them for it and try to convince them otherwise, which I have to be honest, for a few years was true. Now I have people who I deeply care about who come up to me and they say, Yoni, I know you don't believe this stuff, but I need a partner in learning more. And I know that you are a curious person and can help me. I had a friend the other day who came up to me and said, Yoni, I know you might think it's ridiculous. I'm really interested in astrology, but I haven't learned a lot about it. And I said, you're right. I do think it's ridiculous. And let's learn it together, right? I happen to know a few things. I know a few good places to look. Let's find the best argument for the thing that you believe. For you, it might convince you of the thing that you want to be convinced of. And for me, at least I get to resist against a good argument and rather than a bad argument. So it actually works out in my favor. And so I think with, and what Andrea, what you shared about prayer as well, I think is important, right? Is that where I often, when it comes to practice, where I often disagree with people is, is there, if someone said, is it powerful to pray? I'd say for sure, right? There's power in prayer. Prayer has an effect. I might disagree with the mechanism that you're attributing to, right? You might say prayer works because when I pray, God does. And I might say prayer works because it gives you a sense of community. When I get sick, I know that there are people thinking of me. When someone else is sick, by praying for them, I feel like I am connecting to them. And I might actually then visit them in the hospital, which might have an impact, right? So it's, I think, a little bit arrogant of me to say why you explain that prayer works is wrong and the way that I explain the function of prayer is right. That's a little arrogant. And I would say that's arrogant of someone who says the opposite to me. But I think that's something that, to your question of can you find meaning if you don't believe in X type of God? One, as a person who walks around with no belief in God, I have a lot of meaning in my Judaism and in my Jewish communities, and in many of them, am still accepted. So I think that's, if you don't turn into Spinoza, if you're not like trying to convert everyone to your viewpoint, and I don't know him personally, but I assume if he got kicked out, he probably wasn't so nice. If you have strong human connections, I think that's possible. And so I think it's possible personally and interpersonally. And when you're asking, well, what is this God? There's a quote that we always use at the end of Aleinu that I think is like important as a frame, right? It's this idea that one day, right? It's right? One day God will rule the whole world and everyone will accept God as one and in one name, right? There are brilliant systems of theology, Maimonides, Spinoza, Kaplan, there are all these beautiful. If God is this truth, when someone hits on it, you would expect that everyone would their eyes would open and would accept it. So the fact that there are so many, like Rabbi Zwerin, you said, that you gave the Jewish number of 70, right? There's 70 faces to God, 70 theologies of God. Clearly, no one's totally got it. So whatever it is that a person is feeling in any given moment, you're in relationship with God, even if the definition isn't totally complete and final. Like if you're engaging with God, you're engaging with God. And I think that it's a beautiful thing to teach that broadness of this person had a belief, this person had a system. The theologies are brilliant. The post-Holocaust theologies revised a lot of the pre-Holocaust theologies also in brilliant ways. The fact that they disagree, I think, just shows that there's like a room in the God house for everyone, and you're allowed to change rooms. And so I think that's something that, to the question, I know we got bogged down on a transcendent God, a supernatural God. Does God perform miracles? Do the miracles have to confine to nature? Is there such thing that doesn't confine? Like, these are all beautiful questions. And also, I would say, the struggle is the relationship. And that's the, so anyone who feels doubt, I think is actually more connected than someone likely who feels certainty. And so the question of, can a person find meaning in Judaism without believing in God, or not knowing what God is, or not believing in a certain type of God? If you want to connect, if people in my life, if they want to love me, they love me, right? Whether they know what that looks like or what I want it to look like, if someone wants to love me, they love me. And I think that that's the wrestling, the struggling with, the seeking for. If you spend your life looking for God, you spent your life with God, in my opinion, as an atheist.
That's nice.
That was great.
That was nice. Yeah. So the question then for Mel is, did God speak to Moses at the bush? Or what happened at the bush? Or why did the bush have to burn? Or is that all metaphoric for getting someone's attention to right a social wrong?
Or was Moses the only one who stopped and listened to God at the bush?
Or maybe he was the only one who had the sensitivity to know that there was a wrong being inflicted upon a people in Egypt. And who was going to right that wrong if not him? And maybe that was his moment of decision. And it was just placed in absolutely brilliant poetic form. And Moses, who had killed someone because he was striking, one of his people, and he ran away to save his life. But then he realized, why was he so emotionally involved in this people? Why did he care what an Egyptian taskmaster? I mean, he is an Egyptian. He grew up with an Egyptian palace. Why did he care? And suddenly he realized, wait a second, I identify with that people. And maybe it was something Mom told me when I was growing up. Well, here I am. What do I do now? Well, I know who the Pharaoh is. I used to call him Papa. I used to sit on his lap. Well, now maybe it's time for me to go confront him. Maybe it's time. Who else can do it? I'm the only one that knows where the front door of the palace is, for crying out loud. So maybe I go. Maybe the whole thing becomes an aha moment, metaphorically an aha moment. A light went on, and the light keeps burning, and I can't put it out. It just won't go out. No matter what I try to do, I can't get rid of this passion, this hot flame. I got to do something. Now put it in faith terms, and it's a totally different story. So, I think the Bible is brilliant when it uses faith allusions to explain natural events. And I think Moses had this kind of aha moment when he had to say, there's no one else in the face of the earth that can help this people except me. I'm the only one that knows the language, that knows the place, that knows the people, that knows what needs to be done, that knows how to do it. It's up to me. And the passion is in me, and I can't stop. So.
Why was it a burning bush, though? Can you think of any other thing that would get us that much attention if he was walking in the desert?
Not that I know of. I mean, there were no electric lights. What else could it be? A snake? We already had that story. So couldn't have been a snake. A lizard, a crocodile, scorpion? What would it be if not an unusual event that might actually have happened? Because there are spontaneous combustions in deserts where there is oil underground.
But Rabbi Zwerin, you just, with what you said, proved the that our lives, and actually the lives of everyone who's ever lived, it's fluid. It's not static. And even your own thinking from the time that you're born to the whatever age you are now, you have had things happen to you that have changed you, either for the good or the not so good, but changed you, because our lives are not, as I say, they're not static. They keep changing as we grow older and we have more experiences, and we use those experiences to move on.
Yeah, that is true. Because if you don't change and you don't adapt, then, you know, then what are you?
That's right.
You know. So I sent around this thing the other day about a Japanese camera that reverse ages you as you speak on the phone.
Oh, I love that. That was so wonderful.
Yeah. So my question was, if you're under the age of 30 and it reverses your age by 30 years, does that bring you back with a picture of a previous life? You know, so, you know, we'll see whether Sony is that clever or not. But just think about who you were 30 years ago.
Right.
Not what you looked like, who you were. What was really important in your life 30 years ago? What was critical in your life 30 years? What were the things you prayed for 30 years ago, if you prayed? What was the most important thing happening in your world at the time? What did you need more than anything else 30 years ago? And how has that changed in the last 30 years? My God, it's been dramatic. And if you want to go back 50 years, it's really dramatic. It's incredibly, you're a totally different human being. I mean, you may have the same values, you may have the same passions, but in terms of how you see the world and what you worry about and what you're concerned about and what you're hoping won't happen, what you're hoping will happen, it's totally different. And the things we need now are totally different from what we needed 30, 40, 50 years ago. So obviously you adapt, you change, you become a different you.
Or you become someone like a Holocaust denier. No matter how much proof there is in this world, you still don't believe that happened.
Well, look, you know.
Or something else, doesn't have to be Holocaust.
Half the people,
anything.
Look, the average IQ is 100, right? And that means that half of the people in the world are less than 100,
exactly.
Are in double digits. So that just proves that there's always going to be 50% of the world that's too stupid to know what the hell's happening. And they're going to believe all kinds of stuff that is just moronic.
That's right.
And the other half of the world is going to have to carry them. That's all. So,
Rabbi, can I offer a one-line joke that has to do with the camera?
Sure.
It's a Mitch Hedberg joke. It's just one line, I promise. The joke is, I went over to a friend's house and he said, "Hey, do you want to see a picture of me when I was younger?" And I said, "Every picture is a picture of you when you were younger. If you want to impress me, show me a picture of when you were older."
Touche.
It's very cute.
Very good.
There, my friends. Shabbos blessings to all.
All right. Good Shabbos, Dan, and happy birthdays.
Happy birthday,
Rabbi Steve. And
happy birthday.
Thank you, rabbis.
Wonderful year.
Thank you, Rabbi. And
Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Mel.
Think of a name for our station. I mean, it can't be WSIN. That would not be good. So I'm thinking, and it can't be WINA because there's somebody named Ina in our congregation, lovely lady, but I don't think you want to name it after somebody. And NAI, station WNAI, nay, I don't think so. So the most I could come up with was WSNI, and that's not so great either. So think of call letters for our little Zoom station and see what we can come up with.
We're going to have a Zoom station?
Well, you know, here we are.
But we have a Zoom station.
Maybe WTOR. Maybe that would be good. So we'll see. Think about it. Take care, everybody. Have a great Shabbos. Stay well.
You
stay
too.
safe, and stay happy.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank
you.
Judy, I'll call you about 2:30. I don't know if you heard me. Did you hear me?
What's that?
Okay.